Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. From Eden to eternity, the Bible tells one big story of redemption. My name is Tiffany, and I want to spend a few minutes with you every day walking through the Bible chronologically. Together, we will explore God's sovereign plan as the events of Scripture unfold and point to Jesus. Hey friends! Welcome back to our Year in the Bible journey. Tiffany here, and today we begin the book of 2 Samuel. Back when we started 1 Samuel, we talked about some of the important contextual information for both of these books. But if you're like me, a refresher is always in order. So very quickly, we want to remember that 1 and 2 Samuel are actually one book in the Hebrew Bible. It wasn't until the Bible was translated into Greek that it was split into two books. Many scholars believe the prophet Samuel authored portions of 1 Samuel, but the authorship of the rest of the two books is unknown. 1 Samuel focused on the lives of Samuel and Saul while introducing us to David, and now 2 Samuel will predominantly focus on the life and reign of King David. While we traced the theme of kingship through 1 Samuel, we will now trace the theme of covenant in 2 Samuel as we see the eternal implications of the monarchy. 2 Samuel will still show us that David is a man after God's heart, but we will also see him fail many times. His failure will remind us of our need for a perfect king and how beautifully God keeps his covenants, even when we mess up. So, keep all of that in mind as we walk through 2 Samuel. And let's get started with chapters 1 through 4 today. There's a lot of bloodshed in these chapters and a lot of blame. But we want to keep in mind that each of these events displays David's innocence. Through the author of this historical narrative, God specifically shows how David was innocent in any wrongdoing. This innocence made him worthy of the kingship and the trust of the people. God was establishing David's reign despite the sinfulness of man. The events of 2 Samuel chapter 1 pick up just 3 days after Saul's death, when David learns that Saul and his beloved friend Jonathan have died in battle. The Amalekite that brought David the news was the son of a resident alien, possibly fighting with the Israelites. But we also know he was a liar. This Amalekite claims to have killed Saul at his request, but we also know that Saul fell on his own sword after his armor-bearer refused to kill him. This Amalekite likely saw these events transpire and thought his story of killing Saul would endear him to the new king. We don't know whether David ever learned that the Amalekite was lying, but David's response wasn't what the Amalekite expected. David himself had never raised a hand to kill Saul, even when he had 2 opportunities. This Amalekite pays for the sin of his lie with his own life. David's response towards Saul and Jonathan's deaths was great sorrow. His lament is displayed in verses 19 through 27. David loved and even respected Saul. He likely had some good memories from his time in the palace with Saul's family before Saul gave in to all of his jealousy. And we know his friendship with Jonathan was dear to him. David's response to Saul's death showed a deep respect for the anointed position of king and Saul's role in filling it. David honored the Lord by honoring Saul's position. Because David never usurped Saul's authority or the Lord's, he could take the throne with a clear conscience. In chapter 2, David asked the Lord where he should go, and God sent him to Hebron. Hebron was located in the land of Judah, and it was the ancestral burial place of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it was also a Levitical city. In other words, it was strategic and important, and it was there David was anointed as king over Judah. But Saul's uncle, Abner, had other ideas, and he placed one of Saul's remaining sons, Ishbosheth, on the throne of the remaining tribes of Israel. For a brief time, there were two kings of Israel. One was the true king, while the other was a mere puppet. In addition to Abner and Ishbosheth, we are introduced to the commander of David's army, Joab. Joab was David's nephew and had been with him throughout his wilderness journeys. When Abner seemingly makes a military advance towards Hebron, Joab marches out to meet him. What begins as a playful duel between 24 soldiers quickly deteriorates into a fierce battle, and Abner killing Joab's brother, Asahel. Abner now faced angry brothers in Joab and Abishai, and David's much superior army. He calls a ceasefire and returns home. Before the story of Abner continues, we read a brief aside in chapter 3 that David was growing stronger and the house of Saul was growing weaker. God was with David and was paving the way for him to unify the nation through his kingship. But we also read about David's 6 sons from his 6 wives. As we've already mentioned, David's family will bring him the most grief. And though God blesses David, he does not condone the decision to marry many wives. What further makes this chapter unique is that Abner is accused by Ishbosheth of having a relationship with Saul's concubine. In this ancient culture, after a king died, his wives or concubines were not given in marriage to other men. They were to remain devoted to the king until their own death. We don't know whether this accusation was true or not, but we do know Abner became angry and quickly switched his allegiance to David. David is willing to make a covenant with Abner, but requires that his wife, Michal, the daughter of Saul, be returned to him. Because David needed another wife, right? But Michal is returned, and Abner meets with David and promises the allegiance of all of Israel. But Joab, acting out of revenge, protection of David, or both, decides to kill Abner. David's response to Abner's death was a vital moment in his early reign to gain the trust of the nation, and the Lord provided him with great wisdom. David proves his innocence in Abner's death through his curse on Joab, Abishai, and their family. David also honored Abner through his lament, fasting, and Abner's honorable burial. David's innocence was established, and we read in 2 Samuel 3:37 that everything the king did pleased them. Them being the people of Israel who were currently ruled by Ishbosheth. God made David favorable in the eyes of all of Israel. But David felt powerless under such violence and vengeance. As we've read in the Psalms, David trusted in God's vengeance. He lamented Abner, but he also lamented this violent start to his reign. Sadly, the violence continues in chapter 4 when 2 men from Saul's tribe of Benjamin kill Ishbosheth. They bring his head to David and state that the Lord had brought vengeance, but David knew better. These men likely wanted to be rewarded for killing David's so-called enemy, but we read in verse 1 that Ishbosheth had given up. He was no longer a threat, and these men murdered him. So David punished them accordingly through their own deaths, once again proving his own innocence where Saul's family was concerned. So in closing, what can we learn from so much violence and David's innocence. We can remember that violence and innocence are also part of Jesus' life. Though David was innocent, he was still sinful. Jesus was perfectly innocent and sinless, yet he was convicted, beaten, and died a criminal's death. His innocence, as he endured so much violence, is what makes our hearts clean and whole before the Lord. His innocence washed us white as snow. Because of Christ, we no longer face condemnation, but abundant life and eternal hope. What a gift to celebrate today. Thanks for joining me today. Tomorrow, we journey back to the Psalms once again. I will meet you back there, friends. Bye.